Welcome to New Day's Worship Gathering. This weekend, we have the privilege of hearing from Dave Rinker as we continue in our Love Mercy, Do Justice, Walk Humbly series, looking at the book of Micah. And as we ask a lot of these questions related to justice and how do we become a people who pursue justice, we do look to Jesus, who, as it says in Philippians 2, being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing. He humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. Therefore, God exalted him to the highest place and gave him the name that is above every name, that at the name of Jesus, every knee should bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue acknowledge that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. So we are here today to worship this God and to follow after him as we love mercy, do justice, and walk humbly. And in the midst of this difficult season, we are really grateful for opportunities to be able to be together as a community in ways that do support our community's health and safety. Whether it's gathering for communion service on the lawn behind the YMCA, like we were able to do this past weekend, or meeting with our students in the park for book discussion group, or meeting for outdoor activities with our kids, or also meeting on Zoom for Bible studies. We are just very grateful. And this next Sunday, we do have another opportunity to be together. On August 23rd, next Sunday, 11 a.m., we'll be meeting on the lawn behind the YMCA for a time to talk about New Day's mission and vision and just to celebrate what God is doing. So Taco Jed's food truck will be there as well with tacos for everyone. So come hungry, and we are looking forward to being together. We're also excited to let you know that starting on Sundays in September, we'll be meeting weekly on the lawn behind the YMCA. So check the weekly email for more details on that. And for those families that are wondering, we will be getting information out to you very soon with information related to our kids and teens groups that will be meeting during the school year in whatever format that's in. So thank you to those families that have provided feedback as we do seek God's wisdom in making these decisions. So we are grateful. And we do seek God now and invite you to join us in worship.
Worship songs are a great way to remind us who the ultimate ruler of the world and of our lives is. I've always had a hard time memorizing things, but melodies will get stuck in my head, as anyone who's heard Baby Shark is aware. So we sing to worship God, to rejoice in his goodness, to remember the stories of how we are saved, and that he is the ruler of us all. I needed rescue. My sin was heavy, but chains break at the weight of your glory. I needed shelter, I was an orphan. Now you call me a citizen of heaven. When I was broken, you were my healing, and your love is the air that I'm breathing. I have a future, my eyes are open, 'cause when you call my name, I ran out of that grave, out of the darkness, to your glorious day. You called my name, I ran out of that grave, out of the darkness, to your glorious day. Come and stand before your Maker, full of wonder, full of fear. Come behold His power and glory, yet with confidence draw near. For the one who holds the heavens and commands the stars above is the God who bends to bless us with an unrelenting love. Rejoice, come and lift your hands and raise your voice. He is worthy of our praise. Rejoice, sing the mercies of your King, and with trembling rejoice. We are children of the promise, the beloved of the Lord, one with everlasting kindness, bought with sacrificial blood, bringing reconciliation to a world that longs to know the affections of a Father who will never let them go. Rejoice, come and lift your hands and raise your voice. He is worthy of all praise. Rejoice, sing the mercies of our King, and with trembling rejoice. All our sadness, all our sorrows, Jesus carried up the hill. He has walked this path before us. He is walking with us still, turning tragedy to triumph, turning agony to praise. There is blessing in the battle, so take heart and stand amazed. Rejoice, when you cry to Him, He hears your voice. He will wipe away your tears. Rejoice, in the midst of suffering, He will help you sing. Rejoice, come and lift your hands and raise your voice. He is worthy of all praise. Rejoice, sing the mercies of your King, and with trembling rejoice.
Micah chapter 5, verses 2 through 5. But you, Bethlehem Ephrath, though you are small among the clans of Judah, out of you will come for me one who will be ruler over Israel, whose origins are from old, from ancient times. Therefore Israel will be abandoned until the time when she who is in labor bears a son, and the rest of his brothers return to join the Israelites. He will stand and shepherd his flock in the strength of the Lord, in the majesty of the name of the Lord his God, and they will live securely. For then his greatness will reach the ends of the earth. And he will be our peace when the Assyrians invade our land, and march through our fortresses.
I'm gonna lay down my sword and shield down by the riverside, down by the riverside, down by the riverside. I'm gonna lay down my sword and shield down by the riverside and study war no more.
So there's this story in the book of Kings, chapter 1, where David is at the end of his life. Yeah, I know, sorry. But Adonijah, one of his sons, sort of takes the throne without him knowing, even though, right, he's chosen Solomon, another one of his sons, to do just that. And so Solomon and his mom Bathsheba get together. Nathan sort of coordinates this, and they present the facts to David. And David says, look, here's what you're going to do. Go get a mule, my mule, ride on the east side of the city, enter, you'll get anointed, we'll do all that stuff, and you'll become king. And so this happens. And the city is in uproar as he comes right on this animal, on the east side of the city, and he's eventually installed as king, and Adonijah fears what's going to happen next, but Solomon just says, go home. That's how it ends. Go home.
Good. Okay. In the biblical tradition, there are some characters that loom large, David being one of them. Of course, there's Moses, too. Those first 5 books of the Bible sort of center on this character, Moses, also God, right? Now, in the Hebrew arrangement of the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, the last group of literature are called the writings, and they're sort of centered around David. So the Old Testament starts with Moses, sort of ends with David. And in the middle, you have all of these prophets, right, speaking a word to the people, and histories that sort of undergird their activity. And that's where we'll look when we look at Micah 5 in just a minute. But let me think about David and David's sons for just a second. So Solomon takes the throne, right, rides, a mule in the east entrance of Jerusalem. The city is in an uproar, all this stuff. Solomon, in those first 12 chapters of Kings, First Kings, sort of comes into power, right, under David's authority, under God's authority. And by chapter 8, you're like, man, this might turn out okay. And he has this prayer as he dedicates the temple. And some scholars see this everything kind of ramping up to this moment in chapter 8 where things start to go downhill. And they start to point out, right, in chapter 9, 10, 11, that Solomon starts to head down a very familiar path in the book of Kings. It's the path that every single king takes that eventually leads the people straight into exile, as Micah will point out. But Solomon disobeys the Torah, disobeys Deuteronomy 17 in particular, where you're not supposed to gather chariots and horses, you're not supposed to make war as a king, as a ruler. Oh, also, you're not supposed to gather lots of silver and gold, so wealth. You're not supposed to gather a bunch of wealth, that's the other W. And then don't have a lot of wives, because in the ancient world, especially, having lots of wives was analogous to making treaties with a bunch of nations instead of relying wholly on God. So Solomon, if you read those chapters 9 through 11, Solomon kind of checks all those boxes: war, wealth, women, and we see that his wisdom starts to kind of be an ironic wisdom. Right? God gave him this wisdom, but he's using it to be like one of the kings of the world, which is not what God wants. Right? It's what the people want. And so the people march into exile, kind of like that story back in Genesis when those humans reach for wisdom, ironically, and they end up in exile. Now the people of God, this particular group, is following a similar path. What is God going to do? So let's take a look at Micah. Micah
brings up this conversation. This is the conversation he's entering as a prophet. What do we do about these sons of David, these kings, these rulers that keep violating God's law, keep sending us down the path that eventually leads to exile? And so in chapter 5, which comes right after chapter 4, we have sort of Micah's vision of this future ruler. He doesn't even call him a king. He doesn't call him a Melech. He calls him a Mashol, a ruler, a shepherd. In chapter 4, we see is actually maybe the center of Micah. It's the center chapter, and has this vision of a peaceable world that the people of God are sort of initiating in the world. And then you sort of have this follow-up chapter where Micah starts to explain maybe how that might look. So you have this shepherd ruler, and then the next section is how they will relate to the nations of the world, particularly Assyria at this time. But another group is named that could probably even stand in for every empire ever. Micah has this broad vision of what this ruler is going to be about. So there's the new ruler and their relation to everyone else. And then there's this remnant, this reformed people, this people that have gone through exile, it seems, or some kind of atrocity. It's war, big hint. Micah and his folks have experienced all kinds of war in the 35 years of his ministry. And so there's a depiction of this people that will be like dew from the Lord, right? Like water on the grass, and they'll be peppered throughout the nations. And so there's the people, this remnant people, and their relation to the nations. And eventually, by the end of chapter 5, God sort of shows up, and it's God who will now relate to both Israel and the nations. So let's read those first 5 verses to refresh. Starting with verse 2, "But you, O Bethlehem, Ephrath," which is probably a reference to David's dad, Jesse. And you could look it up, 1 Samuel 17:12 is the reference, and it's right before David kills Goliath. So this small boy killing a giant is evoked partly to help us think about how it is this small nation, Israel, is going to defeat their giants. Are only a small village among all the people of Judah, yet a ruler of Israel will come from you, one whose origins are from the distant past, older than David maybe. The people of Israel will be abandoned to their enemies until the woman in labor gives birth. This is a theme that reaches back into chapter 4 as well. Then at last, his fellow countrymen will return from exile to their own land, and he will stand to lead his flock with the Lord's strength in the majesty of the name of the Lord his God. Then his people will live there undisturbed, for he will be highly honored around the world. This ruler will have some kind of authority to the ends of the earth is another translation. And he will be their peace. And he will be their peace, their well-being, their shalom. This is interesting. How will this ruler rule the people of God and also invite the nations in and rule them as well, while enacting peace, while being their peace, their source of peace? This New Living Translation says, how will that happen? How does that happen? Some of it, I imagine, has to do with how you enter the scene, right? How you enter is the message. How you enter is the message. Now, years ago when I was in high school, my friends thought it would be a funny, it wasn't funny, but they made it funny eventually. They thought it'd be funny to get me on court. It was swirl court, right? So it didn't mean anything. But they all kind of got together behind my back and voted for me so that there'd be enough votes to put me on swirl court. Okay? I was not super well known at all. And so I ended up on swirl court. And there's this moment at our school where you come into the, what's it called? The gymnasium. I was gonna say auditorium, but it was in the gym. And you like walk out to a song that you choose. And this is like your swirl court moment. Okay, this is what defines being on swirl court. I think you have to wear a suit or something like that. I did not. You have to wear nice shoes. I did not. And so everyone chose really cool songs that I didn't know. I wasn't into music. I was into running and biking and swimming. And so I chose, because I had just seen the movie, it had just come out with Tom Cruise, the Mission Impossible theme song, right? Which is, you should listen to it. The remix of it is super cool. But it just paled in comparison to the cool songs that my friends and colleagues had chosen. And by the way, everyone seemed to rehearse or know how to dance to their song, which I did not know how to dance either. So Mission Impossible theme song comes on, and I realized like I have to bust a move. I have to like get out there and like be on swirl court. And so yeah, you could say I busted a move. That's for sure. My grandma, her reaction is instructive. She said to my mom, "Why would David pick that song?" My 80-year-old grandma. Like, doesn't he know he's not cool? How you enter, right, is the message. And in that moment, I was very, very, very uncool. Now, if you think about how it is that God chooses to enter the scene of humanity, how God chooses to enter the world in Jesus, it's instructive, right? Because Jesus doesn't show up as a conqueror, right? Jesus, well, his mom's in the situation where she's about to become a widow when she's pregnant with him. He ends up being a refugee from Africa, right? As they go down to the breadbasket of the ancient Near East, into Egypt, and eventually come back to Galilee. He's born in Bethlehem, but he's from Galilee, right? That's like, no offense to anyone from Wisconsin. I won't pick a town in Wisconsin, and I can't pick a town in Minnesota because I don't want to offend anybody there. I'm from Michigan, so it'd be like the Messiah coming from Escanaba, Michigan. Okay, now Jeff Daniels is from Escanaba. Escanaba in the Moonlight is not a great film, but he made that film. It'd be like somebody like, oh yeah, the Messiah's coming from Escanaba. Right? These humble beginnings. A rabbi carpenter. This is how God enters the world. And the way God is seen ultimately, what God does in flesh and blood in Jesus, is he dies. The cross, right, and the resurrection become the symbol of God's rescue operation, what it looks like for God to enter. Paul, when he's talking about this in Ephesians 2, verse 14, he says, he is our peace. He quotes Micah 5:5. But what he's talking about the Gentiles, the nations, and this chosen people, Israel, and how God has in Jesus made peace between the nations, has reconciled, has knit together this new people, no matter what your difference is, right? Nation, right? Who you voted for. God in Jesus is knitting this people together to be, right, God's love, God's peace, God's reconciling power in the world. So how how does Jesus enter? Right? People are cheering as he comes into Jerusalem, right, to deliver his last teaching and to die and rise for this new world. And Jesus gets a donkey, right? And rides up, and they're cheering for him, this new kind of ruler, the son of David, they call him. This king, which is eventually what he's crucified for. Claiming to be the son of David, claiming to be the new king. This is what gets Herod all nervous. A new king is coming. And so he comes, and the city is in an uproar, kind of like when Solomon entered. But this son of David doesn't gather the tools of war, right? Is going to send the chariots and the horses away from Israel. Doesn't gather stockpiles of cash. Doesn't marry lots of women. Right? This king is not about power through oppression. This king is about power through liberation. This king is inviting all nations to participate in something that no king on this earth has claim to. What does it look like for God to enter? And what does it look like for this people to come behind this God, to walk with this God, to do justice alongside this God, to love kindness alongside this God? Friends, he is our peace, and he enters the world in an instructive way. He invites us to put down whatever we've been clasping to, right? What we've built our identity around. He says, come, I'll be your peace. I'll be your peace. I'm the one rescuing you, and you, and you, and you. Friends, may you be like the dew that the Lord puts on the grass in the morning. May you refresh those around you. May you hold dear the things that matter most, and may you know deep in your bones that he is our peace.
Down by the riverside and study war no more. I'm gonna rinse off this oil and blood.
Yahweh, singing your name. Yahweh, Yahweh, singing your name. Yahweh, Yahweh, singing